आप सबका आज के शाम यहाँ बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। पिछले 2 दिनों से इस बात को लेकर काफ़ी आशंका व्यक्त की जा रही थी कि यह कार्यक्रम होना चाहिए या नहीं होना चाहिए और हो पाएगा या नहीं हो पाएगा। लेकिन आधिकारिक रूप से तो हम युद्ध की स्थिति में नहीं हैं। हालांकि टेलीविज़न चैनल ये कह रहे हैं कि हमने युद्ध जीत भी लिया है। तो वैसी हालत में चूँकि हम नहीं हैं तो हम सामान्य कार्य का कामकाज कर सकते हैं और अपना जीवन स्थगित नहीं करें, ऐसी संभवतः सरकार की भी इच्छा है। तो हमें यह देख के बहुत खुशी हो रही है कि आप सब यहाँ इकट्ठा हैं। आज जिस माहौल में हम इकट्ठा हैं वह बहुत ही गंभीर है। उत्तेजना का एक वातावरण बनाया जा रहा है और इस समय सबसे ज़्यादा ज़रूरत इस बात की है कि हम सब मिलकर संयम बनाने की कोशिश करें और समझदारी समाज में स्थापित हो इसकी कोशिश करें। हमने आपको पहले ही सूचना दी है और दावत दी है। आज हम यहाँ इकट्ठा हैं अपने मित्र, लेखक, पत्रकार आशुतोष की सबसे नई किताब रिक्लेमिंग भारत, व्हाट चेंज्ड इन 2024 एंड व्हाट लाइज अहेड। आप सबका बहुत स्वागत। मैं सबसे पहले आमंत्रित करता हूँ इस किताब के लेखक आशुतोष से कि वे यहाँ आएँ। मैं अनुरोध करता हूँ मनोज झा जी से कि वे मंच पर आएँ। मैं अनुरोध करता हूँ राजदीप सरदेसाई से कि वे मंच पर आएँ। प्रोफेसर जोया हसन, प्रोफेसर जोया हसन आ ही रही होंगी, आ चुकी हैं और यहीं पर। प्रोफेसर जोया हसन, आप कृपया मंच पर आएँ। हाँ कर। तो सबसे पहले इस किताब का लोकार्पण
आपके हाथ में नहीं है।
आपके। अभी हमारी एक मित्र कह रही थी कि क्या ऐसा नहीं है कि यह किताब कुछ पहले लिख दी गई है, रिक्लेमिंग भारत, और क्या ऐसा नहीं है कि इस किताब में एक महत्वाकांक्षा है। जो भी हो वह हम अभी चर्चा के दौरान सुनेंगे, लेकिन चर्चा का तरीका यह है कि सबसे पहले हम आशुतोष से अनुरोध करेंगे कि वे अपनी किताब के बारे में बताएं और उसके बाद एक एक करके हमारे पैनल में जो मित्र हैं वे अपनी बात रखेंगे।
थैंक यू अपूर्वानंद जी, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका। प्रोफेसर जोया हसन जी, मैंने जिनको देखकर हम लोग पढ़ना लिखना सीखा, आप यहाँ मौजूद हमारे लिए बड़े गर्व की बात है। और हमारे मित्र मनोज झा जी, कहना ही क्या, संसद में बड़े दिनों के बाद कम से कम एक ऐसी आवाज़ आई है जो जब बोलती है तो संसद भी रुक कर सुनती है उनको। वी आर सो प्रिविलेज्ड। एंड माई बॉस राजदीप हैड ऑलवेज बीन माई बॉस and who is a legend in his own time. Thank you. बहुत सारे लोग ये सोच रहे होंगे कि मैंने ये किताब क्यों लिखी, रिक्लेमिंग भारत। दिलचस्प बात यह है कि जब मेरे एक मित्र ने मुझे फ़ोन किया और उन्होंने कहा कि देखा, मैं तो बहुत पहले से कह रहा था कि आशुतोष संघी है, रिक्लेमिंग भारत की बात करने लगा है, तो मुझे सुनकर अच्छा लगा। आई फेल्ट रियली नाइस कि कम से कम किताब का शीर्षक ऐसा है जिसमें कोई विवाद नहीं है। नहीं, अक्सर पिछली किताब था हिंदू राष्ट्र, तो उसको लेके थोड़ा बहुत विवाद था। जाहिर सी बात है कि आप इतने बड़े बड़े लोगों को सुनने के लिए आए, लेकिन मैं कॉन्टेक्स्ट में इस चीज़ को रखना चाहता हूँ। मेरी ये किताब दिस इज़ नॉट अ क्रॉनिकलिंग ऑफ इवेंट्स, I tried to understand and tried to explain why and how the things happened and what are the ideological reasons. उसके जो theoretical reasons हैं, जो विचारधारा के सवाल हैं, उनसे उन चीज़ों को explain करने की मैंने कोशिश की है. और उस संदर्भ में मेरी अपनी एक थिंकिंग है, मेरा अपना एक आइडियोलॉजिकल फ्रेमवर्क है, जिसपे मैंने पुरानी किताब भी लिखी थी, इसका नाम है हिंदू राष्ट्र. और इस किताब को जब तक मैं उस फ्रेमवर्क को क्लियर नहीं करूँ तो शायद लोगों को बात समझ में नहीं आएगी. मेरा अपना मानना यह है कि 2014 के बाद से हम जो चीज़ विटनेस कर रहे हैं, दैट इज इन माय ओपिनियन इज अ मार्च ऑफ एन आइडियोलॉजिकल स्टेट. यानी 2014 के बाद से भारत एक आइडियोलॉजिकल स्टेट की तरफ बड़ी तेजी के साथ बढ़ता हुआ दिखाई पड़ रहा है. और ये स्थिति पहले कभी नहीं थी. वो आइडियोलॉजिकल स्टेट में क्यों कहता हूँ, किस लिए कहता हूँ, उसके लिए मेरे अपने 5 उसके एलिमेंट्स हैं. और उसका पहला एलिमेंट ये है कि जो हो सकता है थोड़ा कंट्रोवर्शियल भी हो, लोगों को शायद वो बात थोड़ी सी अखरे कि जब मैं ये बात कहता हूँ कि 2014 में जो सत्ता का हस्तांतरण हुआ, द ट्रांसफर ऑफ पावर व्हिच हैपेंड बिटवीन मनमोहन सिंह एंड नरेंद्र मोदी इज नॉट अ सिंपल ट्रांसफर ऑफ पावर व्हिच आई कंपेयर इट with a kind of transfer of power which happened on 15th August 1947. यानी 1947 15 अगस्त को जो सत्ता का हस्तांतरण हुआ था, ये लगभग उसी तरीके का सत्ता का हस्तांतरण है. वो इसलिए है क्योंकि तब ब्रिटिशर्स से इंडियंस को हुआ था और उसके बाद 1947 से लेकर 2014 तक एक मोटा कंसेंसस सहमति इस देश के अंदर थी, which is called Nehruvian consensus, or you can call it the constitutional consensus, the democratic consensus. That consensus was never broken. One can ask a question, Atal Bihari Vajpayee became a prime minister, he was from the RSS and the BJP, why? I'm not talking about it. But if you look at the 6 years of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, you realize that that consensus was not broken, despite a few aberrations here and there. But in 2014, when Narendra Modi became the prime minister, that consensus was broken, and that is why I say that the transfer of power between Manmohan Singh and Narendra Modi was not an ordinary transfer of power, but an extraordinary transfer of powers, and that's what is my first point. My second point is 2014 के बाद से the nature of a state has also changed. It is not the same nature of a state now after 2014. There is a fundamental change. The nature of a state has changed, and what you see today and what shocks many of us present over here and outside, especially our the liberal friends, that they're finding it very difficult that we're still living in the same country which used to live before 2014. I'm not talking about all of them, but probably a few of them. So the nature of a state has also changed. The point number 3, and which many of my friends do not agree with me, but when I say this, that there is it's a revolution. In the classical framework, this is seen as a leftist revolution or the liberal revolution. This is basically a right-wing revolution. And why I call it? For the 3 simple reasons. One simple reason is disconnectedness from the past, disruption in the present, and deconstruction in the future. When you look at India, India since 2014, you will distinctly realize that this government has tried to disconnect itself from the immediate past. Everything that is done before 2014, deliberately, qualitatively, they are trying to disconnect themselves. Disruption, which we are witnessing every day on a daily basis, I don't need to explain that, and deconstruction. And it is basically the deconstructions which defines why there is a disconnectedness from the past and the disruption in the present, because every arm of the society and every sector of the state has to work for the deconstruction of a utopia which is called Hindu Rashtra. And in my opinion, anybody and everybody, it is the fundamental nature of an ideological state that anybody and everybody who differs with that has no other option than to be branded as an enemy and has to be annihilated. This is what exactly is happening. Whether with the left liberals or minorities or anybody else. The fourth point is, that again is very important. This state, which we are witnessing since 2014, is constantly at war. It's always in a war mode. And I'll just cite one statement of Mr. Mohan Bhagwat, which is said in 2023 in Ahmedabad. 1200 सालों से हिंदू एक युद्ध में है और हिंदू ये युद्ध हारना बर्दाश्त नहीं कर सकता, अफोर्ड नहीं कर सकता. इट हैज टू विन, एंड उसको अपने इंटरनल वीकनेसेस को एनहाइलाइट करना है. डज इट रिमाइंड यू somebody before the 1945? So it is constantly at war. जब हम कुछ चीज़ें देखते हैं, जब हम मॉब लिंचिंग को देखते हैं, जब हम किसी से जय श्री राम की बात करते हुए देखते हैं, जब हम ट्रिपल तलाक को देखते हैं, जब हम वक्फ लॉस को देखते हैं, जब हम धारा 370 को देखते हैं, तो हमको लगता है ये कोई ऐसे ही कोई इवेंट है. नो, there is a serious understanding behind it, there is a serious ideological reasons, and it is done because the war is going on between the two religion, and as a part of that war to defeat your enemy, these are used as a tools. And finally, which I call it the construction of a collective mindset, or construction of a new Hindu. एक प्रोसेस लगातार चल रहा है जिसको मैं कहता हूं भारत के सामूहिक विवेक का पुनर्गठन या पुनर्निर्माण. भारत के सामूहिक विवेक का पुनर्निर्माण आप ये हर आइडियोलॉजिकल पार्टी करती है, ये हर आइडियोलॉजिकल गवर्नमेंट करती है. और इसीलिए आप कुछ लोगों, जब आप अपने व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप को देखते हैं, उसमें आप सडनली आपको लगता है ये मेरा दोस्त ये तो ऐसा तो था नहीं, ऐसा कैसे हो गया. दैट्स अ पार्ट ऑफ दैट ब्रेन, जिसे कहते हैं कि कंटिन्यूअस कंडीशनिंग ऑफ माइंड, जो कंटिन्यूअस प्रोसेस है. दैट इज व्हाई few of our friends, they also start believing and start saying the same thing which the perpetrators of the propaganda wants us to believe and say. And sometimes subconsciously we also say the same things. So these are the 5 elements. On that basis I believe that what we are witnessing today is a march of an ideological state. In this book, I haven't structurally put this framework, but when I was talking about the reclaiming Bharat, तो कुछ लोगों को लगता है कि रिक्लेमिंग भारत क्यों. इसमें 4 चीजें हैं जो, और चारों अपने हिसाब से इसको एक्सप्लेन कर सकते हैं. भारतीय जनता पार्टी, आरएसएस, हिंदुत्व की विचारधारा के लोगों को लगता है कि एक हिंदुस्तान के पिछले 1200 सालों में उनसे छूट गया, या जो उनसे छीन लिया गया. हिंदू इतने लंबे समय तक गुलाम था, उस भारत को हमें रिक्लेम करने की जरूरत है, जहां दूध और शहद की नदियां बहा करती थी, जो एक जमाने में विश्वगुरु हुआ करता था. उस भारत को रिक्लेम करने की जरूरत है. दूसरी तरफ वो लोग हैं जिनका कहना है कि 1947 के बाद से, जब से भारत आजाद हुआ, संविधान बना, लोकतंत्र आया, 2014 के बाद से उनका वो भारत उनसे छिन गया है. हमें उस भारत को रिक्लेम करने की जरूरत है जो संविधान में चलता है, लोकतंत्र में चलता है, और जो अपने आप को लिबरल कहता है. वो जो हिंदुस्तान था उसको हमें रिक्लेम करने की जरूरत है. 2000 भारत में जब संविधान लागू हुआ तो एक चीज हुई कि एक बहुत ही साइलेंट तरीके से एक डेमोक्रेटिक रिवॉल्यूशन इस देश के अंदर हुआ. क्योंकि जब हमने जिस दिन संविधान एक्सेप्ट किया, एडमिट किया, उस दिन तक, 1 सेकंड पहले तक, हिंदुस्तान सिविलाइजेशनली कभी भी इक्वल सोसाइटी नहीं थी. विद वन स्ट्रोक ऑफ अ पेन सडनली वी बिकेम अ इक्वल सोसाइटी. हम सिविलाइजेशनली अनइक्वल सोसाइटी थे, जिसको बाबा साहब अंबेडकर ग्रेडेड इनइक्वालिटी की बात करते हैं. Within Brahmins there is inequality, within Kshatriya there is inequality, within Vaishya there is inequality. So that inequality is the inherent strength or weakness of this civilization, which we call a Hindu civilization or the Indian civilization or the Bharatiya civilization. लेकिन उस संविधान ने पहली बार इस अनइक्वल सोसाइटी को इक्वालिटी दी, लिबर्टी दी, लेकिन फ्रेटर्निटी नहीं दी, जो फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन के 3 इंपॉर्टेंट कॉन्सेप्ट, इक्वालिटी, लिबर्टी एंड फ्रेटर्निटी. वो जो फ्रेटर्निटी नहीं है, जो सोशल इक्वालिटी नहीं है, वो तबका आजादी के बाद से, संविधान लागू होने के बाद से अपने उस स्टेटस को रिक्लेम करने की कोशिश कर रहा है, जिसको हम दलित कह सकते हैं, जिसको हम पिछड़ा कह सकते हैं, जो हिस्टोरिकली डाउन ट्रॉडन है, हिस्टोरिकली सप्रेस्ड है. और एक और तबका है जिसको लगता है कि मंडल कमीशन लगने के बाद से और संविधान में रिजर्वेशन आने के बाद से उसने अपनी जमीन को कंसीड कर लिया है, वो है अपर कास्ट. वो बीजेपी के माध्यम से उस जमीन को रिक्लेम करना चाहता है। तो आप इसको अपने तरीके से कर सकते हैं। जब मैंने इस किताब के बारे में सोचा और बात करने लगा, 12 मिनट तो हुए नहीं, 2 मिनट, लास्ट की बात मैं कहना चाहता हूं, और मैं ये बहुत जिम्मेदारी के साथ कहना चाहता हूं। दिस गवर्नमेंट, दिस फिलॉसफी, दिस आइडियोलॉजी does not believe in Indian constitution, and I want to bet my neck for this. Two things. A few days back, Mohan Bhagwat has said we have to decolonize mind. अभी एक कोशिश, एक थ्योरेटिकल फ्रेमवर्क बनाने की कोशिश बीजेपी और आरएसएस की तरफ से हो रही, संघ परिवार की तरफ से हो रही है, जहां एक आर्गुमेंट दिया जा रहा है, एक आर्गुमेंट को बिल्ड किया जा रहा है कि ये जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन की बात हम करते हैं, जो सेपरेशन बिटवीन चर्च एंड स्टेट के बारे में बातचीत करते हैं, जो डेमोक्रेसी के बारे में बातचीत करते हैं, दिस इज बेसिकली अ क्रिश्चियन फ्रेमवर्क। और उस क्रिश्चियन फ्रेमवर्क के तहत ये हमारा संविधान बना है, हमने लोकतंत्र लिया, सेपरेशन ऑफ चर्च। क्यों कहते हैं? क्योंकि उनको लगता है कि 15वीं शताब्दी के अंदर जब चर्च के खिलाफ एक रिवोल्ट हुआ, प्रोटेस्टेंट जब एक नया रिलीजन बना, तो उसने पहली बार चर्च एंड स्टेट के बीच में डिस्टिंग्विश किया कि दोनों अलग अलग होने चाहिए। उस फ्रेमवर्क को लेके हमारे लोगों ने संविधान बनाया है, इसलिए इस संविधान को बदलने की जरूरत है, क्योंकि ये इंडियन इथॉस में संविधान नहीं बना है, ये क्रिश्चियन फ्रेमवर्क में बना हुआ संविधान है, इसको बदलने की जरूरत है। और आखिरी बात, दीनदयाल उपाध्याय 1984 में 85 में बीजेपी ने उसको ऑफिशियल डॉक्यूमेंट बना के रखा है, इंटीग्रल ह्यूमनिज्म को। 1965 में पुणे में 4 दिन का व्याख्यान माला हुआ था, उस व्याख्यान माला में दीनदयाल उपाध्याय ने इंटीग्रल ह्यूमनिज्म की बात की थी। उस इंटीग्रल ह्यूमनिज्म में अगर आप ध्यान से पढ़ें तो उसमें संविधान के बारे में कहा जाता कि भारत का संविधान भारत की एकता और भारत की अखंडता के खिलाफ है, उसका दुश्मन है। These are not my words, word written by Deendayal Upadhyay in his book called Integral Humanism. भारत का संविधान भारत की एकता और अखंडता के खिलाफ है, खतरनाक है। That is an official document of the BJP. And Deendayal Upadhyay advocates India needs a धर्म राज्य, और धर्म राज्य में जो धर्म है अगर वो एक आदमी के साथ है तो उसकी बात मानी जाएगी, संविधान की बात नहीं मानी जाएगी, मेजॉरिटी की बात नहीं मानी जाएगी, बहुमत की बात नहीं मानी जाएगी। नाउ हमारा संविधान तो इसके बारे में बात नहीं करता। हमारा संविधान तो कहता मेजॉरिटी रूल होनी चाहिए। हमारा संविधान तो स्टेट एंड चर्च के बीच में डिफरेंशिएशन की बात करता। हमारा संविधान तो इक्वालिटी के बारे में बात करता। हमारा संविधान कहता है कि संविधान की वजह से हम लोग एक हैं। एंड देन दीनदयाल उपाध्याय goes on to say this फेडरल स्ट्रक्चर जो है ये भारत की सबसे बड़ी कमजोरी है। ये जो फेडरल स्ट्रक्चर है भारत की सबसे बड़ी कमजोरी है। दैट इज व्हाई वी नीड अ वेरी स्ट्रॉन्ग स्टेट। अब जो हम अलग अलग राज्यों के अंदर अपोजिशन रूल्ड स्टेट्स में जो हम गवर्नर्स का रोल देखते हैं, ऐसे ही नहीं, इसके पीछे आइडियोलॉजिकल रीजंस एंड आइडियोलॉजिकल कन्विक्शंस हैं। हाँ, इसलिए मैंने कहा कि ये जो पूरी जो मेरी समझ थी, मैंने उसको इसमें समराइज करने की कोशिश की और ये बताने की कोशिश की है कि अब जो स्थिति पैदा हो रही है वहाँ पे आपको लगेगा कि शायद कुछ ब्रेक लगाने की कोशिश की जा रही है। वो ब्रेक लगाने की कोशिश नहीं हो रही, वो बेसिकली जितना गेन है उसको कंसोलिडेट करना है और कंसोलिडेट करके नेक्स्ट लीप, आइडियोलॉजिकल लीप के लिए हमको तैयारी करनी है। दैट इज व्हाई मोहन भागवत सेज बिना मुसलमान के हिंदुत्व अधूरा है। और आरएसएस के प्रमुख जिनको परम पूजनीय कहा जाता है, अगर वो कोई बात कहते हैं तो उनके लोगों के लिए वो पत्थर की लकीर है, लेकिन उसके बावजूद भी अगर एक तबके के खिलाफ अत्याचार बढ़ रहा है तो व्हाई शुड वी बिलीव हिम। थैंक यू।
बहुत शुक्रिया आशुतोष। मैं इसके बाद आमंत्रित कर रहा हूँ प्रोफेसर जोया सन। जैसे आपको।
थैंक यू। सबसे पहले तो अपूर्वानंद का शुक्रिया और नेहरू डायलॉग्स का कि आपने ये जो डिस्कशन रखा है, इट्स वेरी वेरी टाइमली इन द प्रेजेंट कॉन्टेक्स्ट। Then I think a very warm congratulations to Ashutosh for this wonderful and highly readable book, which is full of information, some new information, and more importantly, a lot of very interesting insights. As I think has just been said, it is an excellent account of the regime in power, especially, of course, in the run-up to the 2024 elections, which is the focus of the book. Now, there is already considerable analysis of the 2024 elections, and Rajdeep Sardesai's book, who's one of the panelists, is one of the important books, 2024, the election that surprised us. I've just been reading it, so I think I'm really looking at both these books together, though they are in a way significantly different. But I think why I find Ashutosh's book interesting and important, because I think what stands out is that it is not the usual election analysis, but a political analysis of the current regime. And I think Ashutosh breaks from the well-rehearsed argument that there is nothing new about the actions and functioning of this regime, even though it is, as he pointed out in his introductory remarks, clearly a very different regime. It's a right-wing regime. But I think so much of the analysis, especially in the media, and I would say even academic analysis, and I can certainly speak of political science analysis, seems to think that there is a great deal of continuity between the past and the present, and therefore there isn't really a serious analysis of the change, the very significant changes that have taken place in our economy, polity, and society. And I think there are three very striking changes that actually sum up the change. One is, of course, the abrogation of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and I do think that the Waqf Amendment Act, although for the moment there is a temporary stay on it, is perhaps as important, if not more important, than many of the other very significant changes that have been introduced. So I think the book offers a very compelling analysis of right-wing ideology in the last decade and why we are where we are. It explores how politics and ideology intersect to shape New India, which is clearly very different from the old India. And it is, now of course it is primarily a political narrative which captures a critical moment in India's contemporary journey, opening up questions about ideology, identity, and governance. There are no doubt elements of continuity persist in certain domains, particularly in the area of economy, in the area of macroeconomic policy. There are obvious elements of continuity, and also in the stability of institutions and the democratic framework, particularly elections, which are still, notwithstanding all the complaints of the opposition, are perhaps largely free and fair. And the fact that we still have elections is itself so very important. But overall, I think the point that this book makes, and which is why I liked it very much, is that it emphasizes change over continuity, and it makes the point which again Ashutosh made in his introductory remarks, and that is the change is deeply ideological. What we have now is a far more centralized political system, more technocratic in many respects, and these changes have had far-reaching effects for our democracy and governance. And above all, I think something that concerns all of us is that there is a clear shift from unity in diversity, which was India's hallmark, so to speak. There is a shift from unity in diversity to unity in uniformity. and a rejection of any trace or any form of asymmetry or difference. Now, the notable changes that he discusses, and I think many political analysts have noted, is of course one is deinstitutionalization, authoritarianism, personal rule, systematic building of a personality cult, and he has a very interesting chapter on divinity and the sudden declaration of a certain leader that he is divine. Then I think there is also a discussion, which again is important, is about where he lists a lot of institutions which have been hollowed out. And that list is, of course, long, and we're all familiar with that. I mean, the Reserve Bank of India, I mean, I hate to say that, but obviously even the Reserve Bank of India, and we do recall the role of the Reserve Bank of India, which left much to be desired during the demonetization controversy. The Election Commission, the Central Information Commission, and we are all aware that the Central Information Commissions in the states are hardly functional. Even at the central level, the Central Information Commission bears very little resemblance to what it was when it was established, and then it was really a very radical move. And of course, so much has happened in universities, and my own university, the Jawaharlal Nehru University, where I taught for decades, is, what can one say to what has happened to that university. And several, not just JNU, but other institutions as well, but perhaps JNU in a way was for them an institution that they wanted to conquer, and indeed, to some extent, that conquest has been achieved. And then of course, the role of the governor and so on and so forth, and changes in the federal system. But I think Ashutosh focuses, and quite rightly, I think, given his overall focus on the elections, he focuses on the Election Commission of India, which, as he points out, is far more partisan. And I think he makes a point that the Election Commission of India is more like, I mean, these are not his words, but in effect suggesting that it's more like a political commission. But I think the book's broader focus, of course, is an analysis of the 2024 elections, and very importantly, the setbacks faced by the BJP in this election, despite the extraordinary and huge advantages that it had over its over rival parties. And I must say, Rajdeep's book, which I'm still in the middle of reading, really gives a very, very nice account of the unequal or the uneven playing field in the 2024 election. And as Rajdeep points out, that it was perhaps more unequal and more uneven than ever before. Now, so under this overall template, there are, however, a few issues that require our consideration, not just Ashutosh's consideration, but our consideration. First is, and in a way Rajdeep's also, because his book is dealing with the same subject, and that is, first, why did this very powerful party with these huge advantages get only 240 and not 400 seats in 2024? Now, most analysts, including including this book under discussion, has highlighted two reasons. First, that many activists in the RSS sat out the campaign. The second reason that has been offered by most analysts is a decline in the support of Dalits and Adivasis, and some of this decline had to do with the fact that many of them were alarmed by the prospect that if the ruling party were to be re-elected, and if it were to get as many seats as it is declaring it will get, it will it could result in the removal of reservations for them in educational institutions and government jobs. Now, the question then is that did the Samvidhan Bachao Andolan, which I certainly think was a really smart Andolan or movement or however we want to put it, certainly I think did that really shift the needle towards the opposition? It seems as though in UP it certainly did, and possibly in Maharashtra. I'm not sure whether it really had a significant impact in other states. But I think the really interesting questions pertain to my own state, which is UP. Now, the BJP had assumed that the election was a done deal in UP after the Ram Temple's consecration in January, which was billed as the ultimate triumph of Hindutva. But, surprise of surprise, far from gaining more votes on the back of these developments, or the back of the inauguration of the Grand Ram Temple, far from gaining more votes or seats on the strength of this temple inauguration, the vote declined in the hot seat of Hindu nationalism, which is really UP. And within UP, the real hot areas, if you will, or the hot districts, are again a part of UP that I come from, which is Awadh and the Ayodhya, Lucknow, Ayodhya region. Now, of course, in Lucknow, there was no decline. Lucknow BJP did not lose. But the Faizabad, Ayodhya, where the temple is located, rejected the party in favor of the Samajwadi Party leader from a Dalit community in a general seat. It was not a reserved seat. Now that, I think, is something so dramatic and so significant, and the battle cry of the Samajwadi Party, I thought, was just brilliant. And that was, their battle cry was, "Na Mathura na Kashi, Abki bar Avadhesh Pasi." Avadhesh Prasad being the name of the Samajwadi candidate. So neither Mathura nor Kashi, this time Avadhesh Pasi. Now this, believe it or not, triumphed over the Ram Temple move, much to the discomfiture of the Saffron camp. Now Ashutosh gives his argument, where I do have some reservations, not that I disagree with, but I think much of his analysis seems to center on the whole issue of caste, and that in the ultimate analysis in UP, caste trumps everything else. So caste trumped, so to speak, even the Ram Temple issue. But I think this argument is somewhat inadequate, because I think the defeat in the constituencies in the Awadh region, which, as I said, was the epicenter of the Ram Janambhoomi movement, is really part of a broader discontent among millions of people who have been left behind in India's growth story. I mean, economic development hasn't taken off in UP, despite the existence of a double-engine sarkar since 2017. And UP is one of the most poorly performing economies in the country, but there's hardly any discussion. I think the setbacks in UP underlines the need underlines the need to allow for political economy issues which have implications for politics. And the point then is that political analysis cannot be separated from economic discontent and inequality, especially as inequality in India has soared in the past decade. But on the other hand, the BJP still managed to win 240 seats. And why is that so? I would argue, and here I think I find there's a little bit of a difference between the two books that I've talked about, which is, I think the media support is certainly a very, very major factor in why BJP managed to hold on. And I think what I would suggest is that the Indian media is somewhat, as we speak, that is today, is somewhat different because the Indian media is corporate owned but government controlled. Whereas in the past, let us say it was corporate controlled but certainly not government controlled. Now, I think that is what really accounts for the fact that the media is more or less functions like a department of the government. And as I think one journalist, Anand Sahai, in an article once said that it almost appears as though the media is on government duty. And he was obviously speaking of media today. The second issue really is that did Rahul Gandhi and the Bharat Jodo Yatra make a difference to the 2024 election result? I think this requires much greater discussion. I am of the view that the Bharat Jodo Yatra was a turning point not just for Rahul Gandhi, but for the Congress. And I think here Ashutosh makes an interesting point, and that is that the Bharat Jodo Yatra, with all the talk of Mohabbat Ki Dukaan and so on, all that is fine. But ultimately, it was articulating a different ideological narrative. And that is an ideological narrative of social justice. And surely, I think that contributed significantly to an improvement in Congress's tally when obviously most commentators and certainly in the media were not giving the Congress anything more than 60, but for the Congress to have doubled its tally, I think was largely because of the Bharat Jodo Yatra. Now, in conclusion, I think let me just say that against this background, it is hard to overstate the significance of the 2024 verdict, which I think reveals both the strengths and limitations of Indian democracy. Parliamentary election results in India, Sri Lanka, France, United Kingdom in 2024, and Canada and Australia in 2025 shows significant voter discontent with the right. In India, I think the 2024 election results hint at a crack in the populist facade and a widening socio-economic discontent. And I think the political rebuff is an indication of the space for a political constellation against it. Now, that said, I'd just like to raise three questions in the end for all of us. And that is because the discussion is on constitutional democracy, broadly speaking. And that is that clearly constitutional democracy in India is under pressure. As we speak today, there are enough indications of the pressures on constitutional democracy with restrictions on free speech and dissent, which indicates that democratic backsliding can occur even within formally democratic systems. And there are three deeper questions with regard to constitutional democracy and its future. Number one, can democracy survive without cultural and political pluralism? Pluralism is not just a normative good, but a structural necessity for democratic functioning. The majoritarian turn that has taken place in India challenges this premise. Second, the role of institutions in safeguarding democracy. While institutions are often seen as bulwarks against authoritarianism, can their capture by an overbearing, domineering executive, such as we have today, accelerate democratic decline? Finally, electoral dominance of the right raises a paradox, and which is the paradox of authoritarianism and illiberalism being supported by popular will. This pushes us to consider the tension between electoral majorities or between ethnic majoritarianism and constitutional democracy. In other words, there is a fundamental conflict between majoritarianism and constitutional democracy. But that said, that does not mean that democracy in India is, democracy is in decline, but certainly not finished by any stretch of imagination. Thank you.
बहुत शुक्रिया और मैं अब राजदीप सरदेसाई से अनुरोध कर रहा हूँ कि वे अपनी बात करें।
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Aparna ji. पहले तो मैं मेरे दोस्त आशुतोष को कॉन्ग्रेचुलेट करना चाहता हूँ कि उन्होंने एक और किताब लिखी है। और इसकी एक वजह यह है कि, और ये किताब में भी दिखाई देती है, आशुतोष उन व्यक्तियों में है जो मैं समझता हूँ सेन और करेजियस दोनों हैं। आज की तारीख में करेजियस होना आपको थोड़ा इनसेन होना पड़ता है। आशुतोष उन व्यक्तियों में है जो करेजियस होने के बावजूद सेन भी है, और इस सैनिटी को इस किताब में नजर आता है, क्योंकि इस किताब में उन्होंने वाकई एक कोशिश की है। ही हैज मेड अ जेन्युइन एफर्ट टू ट्राई एंड अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट हैज हैपेंड नॉट जस्ट इन 2024 but really over the last decade. It is my belief that 2014, and I think there Ashutosh and I agree, was not just another election. It was an election that marked a fundamental transfer of power that has resulted in the emergence of what could eventually be a second republic. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that what was designed is the dismantling of the old order, and in doing so, the capture of the state. That is how we should be looking at the developments that are taking place around us. उसे इस नजरिए से मत देखिए कि कौन सा चुनाव कैसे जीता, महाराष्ट्र में कैसे 3/4 बहुमत आई, या कहाँ आपको 2/3 बहुमत आई, या हरियाणा में क्या हुआ। ये सब चुनाव होते जाएंगे। It is my view that electoral democracy in India is relatively safe. जब हम कहते हैं ना कि हमारे चुनाव जो हैं उसमें there is no level playing field, ये let us be very clear, कोई level playing field नहीं है। ऐसा नहीं है कि दोनों जो पक्ष हैं एक starting point से शुरू होते हैं। I don't think there is any other country, for example, in the world where the major opposition parties' income tax accounts were, bank accounts were frozen. And they were being sent notices from 92, 93 and expected to contest the elections of 2024. So yes, there is no level playing field in our elections, but despite that, as the 2024 election showed, election democracy in India will still survive. That there are still enough checks and balances in our system to at least ensure कि अगर वोटर चाहे तो किसी को वो उखाड़ सकता है, किसी को गिरा सकता है, he can transform Indian elections. The challenge, and this is the topic of the day, is not electoral democracy, it is constitutional democracy. And constitutional democracy is where I believe the fundamental challenge lies, because you have a force that is looking to capture the state, dismantle the old state and capture it. And the old state, as Ashutosh has rightly pointed out in his book, is based on the constitution. The idea of equal citizenship, that every citizen, irrespective of caste, gender, region, will have equal rights, is what is fundamental to the constitution. But this capture of the state wants to negate that fundamental concept that is enshrined in our constitution. Whether you like it or not, you want the capture of the state, wants अब एक majoritarian state हमें चाहिए. We want a state which will be controlled by the will, in a way, and in this context of bringing in religion, of the majority religion. Please understand, the party in power in this country for 27 years in a state like Gujarat, which it calls its laboratory, has never given a single ticket to a Muslim. 27 years. It has invisibilized, therefore, Muslims essentially from public life. That was certainly not what was the intent of the constitution of this country. The party in power in Gujarat, and I'm using Gujarat again as an example, for the last 11 years has had section 144 in place, where if you want an assembly even today of more than 5 persons, you have to take police permission. You have the basis of a coercive state. The party in power in Gujarat for the longest time ran on the personality of an individual, where the cabinets rarely met, where the Gujarat Assembly sessions were consistently reduced, and the number of people who were suspended if they spoke out from the opposition is a very large number. And what Gujarat thought yesterday, slowly but surely, is being brought to the national capital. The parliament, of which my dear friend Mr. Manoj Jha is a member, is slowly but surely being reduced to a notice board, where the vice chairperson of the Rajya Sabha or the vice president and the chairperson of the Rajya Sabha can have the gall to say that the basic structure of the constitution should be now reviewed. The whole basic structure doctrine should be reviewed. Where less than 10% of the bills that are passed in parliament go for any kind of scrutiny. The entire basis of your constitutional democracy was the parliament, and the idea that parliament would be a representative of the will of the people. The Prime Minister of the country does not even address a single question in parliament. हम तो जर्नलिस्ट कहते हैं प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस कब करेंगे, ये तो पूछना इन्होंने पूछना चाहिए कि आप कब आएंगे पार्लियामेंट में. So you have a system where the parliament of the country, the so-called temple of constitutional democracy, is reduced, as I said, to a notice board. Then you have the executive. As we have seen, whether it was with demonetization or whether it was with any major decision this government has taken, including Article 370, for example, even the governor of the state of Jammu and Kashmir was not informed till the night before. And he did not even know that not only was Article 370 to be removed, but a state was going to next morning be reduced to a union territory. So you have created the very basis where executive power now is so concentrated in the hands of 1 or 1.5 persons that the idea of the very cabinet system, which again was supposed to be a fundamental aspect of constitutional democracy, is being eroded day by day. Then you have our courts, which have perfected the idea of the sealed envelope. The moment there is a contentious issue, the moment there is an issue where the government may well find itself on the back foot, Pegasus being a good example, suddenly all all investigations are only handed over in a sealed envelope. The very concept of a sealed envelope to me as a student of law and jurisprudence goes against the very idea of justice. How do I get justice if I don't know what the investigation has shown, because only milords have to know? And we'll find it in case after case, where the courts simply no longer fulfill their constitutional obligations to the citizens of the country. Or Chautha Stambh, and I thought I would come to it last, since मैं नहीं जानता whether Ashutosh still sees himself as a journalist. I unfortunately occasionally do. And last night was for me an example of why I should not be doing journalism.
I was watching you.
जितने लोग टीवी में हैं वही जानेंगे, जब हम तो चेहरे बने पर हमारे स्क्रीन पर जब फ्लैश होता है, I have to see what is there on the screen and say Rajouri में terror attack, या Lahore या Karachi has been captured, या we have walked into Islamabad. Fortunately, I left the studio at midnight, by which time Karachi had not yet been captured. It was captured at 12:05. एंड इंटरेस्टिंगली आई रैंग अप अ फ्रेंड ऑफ माइन, और ये असली कहानी है, मेरा एक दोस्त है जियो टीवी में जो पिछले 10 दिन से मेरे पीछे लगा, सर एक बार तो आ जाइए। तो मैंने वो गेस्ट कोऑर्डिनेटर है वहाँ, तो आई रैंग हिम अप, आई सेड यार ये क्या खबर है कि जियो's headquarters are in Karachi, so I said ये क्या खबर है कि कराची इज बीइंग कैप्चर्ड। ही सेड सर हम तो यहाँ मल्टी कैम कर रहे हैं कराची पोर्ट पर, आप आ जाइए आज भी। The truth of the matter is, and yesterday is only an example, a rather sad example of what we have become. And let's not only look at primetime TV as the sole example of media in general. There is a capture of the media as well. A complete capture of what we can call media. And this capture exists in the manner in which a Twitter handle can be taken down, a channel can be blocked, or corporates can be asked to take over news networks. So what we have at the moment, therefore, is constitutional democracy with its 4 various elements. Parliament, with Manoj Jha ji as one of the few exceptions, by and large reduced to a notice board. The executive, simply एक personality cult पर चल रही है. The judiciary, which finds itself increasingly timid, and the media, which is completely prostrate. Is there a saving grace? Ashutosh seems to suggest, and there, seems to hope, यार ये चुनाव ने तो कम से कम एक जोल्ट दे दिया बीजेपी या आरएसएस को. I'm not so sure. I think that's where the confusion comes between electoral democracy and political and constitutional democracy. Yes, in terms of electoral democracy, जरूर 2024 के चुनावों ने बीजेपी को ये बताया कि आपके पास भले ही लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड आपने नहीं बनाई हो, आपके पास दौलत हो, आपके पास मीडिया पावर हो, आपके पास इंस्टीट्यूशनल पावर हो, आपके पास ईडी हो. हमारे इन माई बुक आई हैव अ चैप्टर कि हमारे पास ईडी है, which is true, told to me on record. The fact is, they still got only 240. So to that extent, Ashutosh is hopeful that maybe this election shows that the voter has struck back in his or her way. कि आप अयोध्या फैजाबाद जैसी जगह पर भी अगर चुनाव हारते हैं, there are forces in Indian elections that you cannot predict. Where I am not as hopeful as my friend Ashutosh is when it comes to constitutional democracy. Because once you've gone down a particular path, once you brought the toxin of religion, धर्म को आप जिस तरह से राजनीति में लाए हो, जब आप एक personality cult इस तरह से बनाते हो, where you can see how easy it is to capture institutions of the state, you have set an example for the future. And therefore, I worry. My only question, and this is, I think, a question that Ashutosh also wrestles with in the book, that are we seeing the rise of Hindutva or have we seen the rise of Moditva? ये जो सवाल है कि क्या 5-10 साल बाद जिस तरह से आपने स्टेट को बदलने की कोशिश की, ये कैप्चर करने की कोशिश की है, ये क्या एक व्यक्ति की वजह से है, या ये आइडियोलॉजिकल कैप्चर जिसके बारे में आशुतोष बात करते हैं, बोथ इन द बुक एंड जस्ट नाउ. I think that battle, I think, will be interesting to see how it plays out. As we saw in Uttar Pradesh, it is possible, and even in elections subsequent to 2024, it's the RSS which has got far more involved in the winning and losing or winning of elections than just Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi. All in all, though, I think, as I said, उम्मीद पे दुनिया कायम है. Ashutosh leaves you with a hope that what we saw in 2024 is not an aberration, that there is going to be a pushback at some stage or the other, that Indians will not accept this kind of creeping authoritarianism, or call it electoral autocracy, use whatever word you want. I must confess, I am no longer as optimistic. I really feel, the more I see it, we are in a quasi-autocracy. And that to me is something which is deeply troubling and leaves huge question marks over the future of our constitutional democracy. Thank you very much.
शुक्रिया आप सबों का. I can see lot many friends from my college days, from media. और ये खूबसूरत सी बात है कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल डेमोक्रेसी के मुस्तकबिल पे अगर शाम को हम लोग इतने लोग हैं तो उतना भी बड़ा ख़तरा नहीं है. हाँ है. Interestingly, you refer to two books. Third one has also arrived. Salman Khurshid. On 15th, there is a discussion. That's also on 2024. So there was something on in 2024.
I'm not noting his arrival.
No, I'm not. In both these books are not rival. Interestingly, both of them have written about 2024, but the vantage point is very different. And so is the case of Salman. But what is important for me to share with you all, and you know that, there was something in 2024 which surprised everyone. I remember the partner we lost in month of January 2024 in Bihar. He thought after the Ram temple, the elections are over. I remember that gentleman conveyed it in no uncertain terms. But still, in Bihar we couldn't do much. We did better than 19, but not at par with Uttar Pradesh. I'll not. This book has 10 chapters, and each chapter could be a book in itself. It's a potential for all of you who are in this vocation. Each chapter has the potential to get converted into a book. I wish to share certain, because we are talking in the shadow of Pahalgam and this Operation Sindoor. Yesterday, one lady interviewed me. Earlier, the promise was on caste census, but then she shifted the gears, and the first set of questions were on Pahalgam. After asking a couple of questions, the interview is yet to be publicized. She asked me, how will it impact Bihar election? When death of your people or death of citizens could be normalized as an election strategy, maybe in the mind of that journalist, that tells you where we have arrived. I was 4 years old in 71. I don't remember, I am not told that whether Indira ji or Congress party then campaigned around टुकड़े कर दिए पाकिस्तान के, बांग्लादेश बना दिया, वगैरह वगैरह. But this is where we have reached. So we are not fighting. आशुतोष जी, it's when you say reclaiming भारत, एक तो मेरा एक point of difference है. इंडिया और भारत को बाइनरी ना बनाया जाए. I mean, I find it utterly disgusting. India and Bharat are not two separate entities. This is the perennial logic. वो जो एक पोजीशन है, इंडिया इंक्लूसिव अगर नहीं है तो वो भारत भी इंक्लूसिव नहीं है. So you have to address the questions of inclusivity, secularism, equality, justice, rather than the lowest hanging fruit of name changing being called the game changing. It doesn't matter. It could be India, Bharat. Of late, I find many people react when I call Hindustan. Whereas I know whether it is written in the constitution or not, Hindustan has been a very popular word with the young people across India. Jai Hind being the short form of that. So, anyway, there was a hashtag by many celebrities after Pahalgam. I'm flagging these issues on the basis of the book when you say reclaiming Bharat. Reclaiming Bharat means somebody else has claimed it already. I just look at the words and I play with it. Somebody has claimed, you wish to reclaim, we wish to reclaim. What does it mean? After the terror attack, many celebrities had a hashtag. कश्मीर हमारा है, आई डिडंट सी एनी ट्वीट कश्मीरी भी हमारे हैं। ये फर्क क्यों? कश्मीर पार्लियामेंट के अंदर भी मैंने कहा कि सिर्फ जमीन का टुकड़ा नहीं है। जमीन के टुकड़े से अगर आप मोहब्बत करते हैं सिर्फ, तो एक बहुत बड़ी आबादी आपसे एलिनेट होती है। पूंछ में वी हैव लॉस्ट मोर देन 20 पीपल। डोंट दे डिजर्व एक श्रद्धांजलि? मुल्क नक्शे से नहीं होता है, इलेक्शन से नहीं होता है। राजदीप भाई, आपने हालांकि कहा इलेक्ट्रल डेमोक्रेसी चलेगी। ये कौन सी इलेक्ट्रल डेमोक्रेसी है जहां एक युद्ध जैसी स्थिति को, सैकड़ों लोगों के मारे जाने को कहा जाए कि ये इलेक्शन की अच्छी चीज हो सकती है? इट विल कंटिन्यू टिल बिहार। ये लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड सिर्फ इलेक्शन कमीशन का मसला नहीं है, इसमें शरीके गुनाह वो सब लोग हैं जो इस तरह के मुद्दे को एक टैसिट अप्रूवल देते हैं, कभी चुप रह करके, कभी उसके पक्ष में आर्टिकल लिख करके, कभी ये कह के कि देश का एक नैरेटिव बदल गया है। देश का नैरेटिव बदला और हम सब उसको देखते रहे। एक बात मैं इसी सिलसिले में, सर मुझको 10 मिनट पे बोल दीजिएगा। आपके एक चैप्टर है, एंड आई हैड पिक्ड अप दैट चैप्टर, द टैसिट रिटेलिएशन ऑफ इंडियन मुस्लिम्स। मुझे घनघोर आपत्ति हुई रिटेलिएशन शब्द पे। इस देश में मुसलमानों की क्या स्थिति है? मैं ये नहीं कहता हूं कि 14 से पहले बहुत गोल्डन पीरियड था, स्वर्ण काल था, लेकिन 14 के बाद जो हाशियाकरण हुआ है, जो मार्जिनलाइजेशन हुआ है, एंड इट हैज नॉट only emboldened BJP's politics, it has impacted all other political parties. मुसलमान कम लड़े, मुसलमान ना लड़े, मुसलमान को रिप्रेजेंटेशन मत, सिक्योरिटी की बात करो सिर्फ। वक्फ का पूरा कानून वो एक सीरीज में जो चल रही थी 370, नॉर्थ इंडिया के मुसलमानों को 370 से मतलब नहीं था, लेकिन देयर वाज अ मैसेज इनहेरेंट इन एब्रोगेशन ऑफ आर्टिकल 370। और मैंने पार्लियामेंट के अंदर कहा था 370 वाज एक्चुअली मीनिंगलेस, कुछ बचा नहीं था उसके अंदर। इट वाज अ साइकोलॉजिकल ब्रिज, जिसकी वजह से कश्मीर में आपको एक बड़ी आबादी थी जो मानती थी वी हैव गॉट समथिंग स्पेशल। आपने एक झटके में उसको खत्म किया। फिर सीए एनआरसी और अभी ये वक्त। द एम वाज to tell the Muslim community that you don't matter in our scheme of things. You don't matter. और उसको एक तरह से अप्रूवल, हालांकि उस पर वोटिंग हुई, उस पर हम लोगों ने पूरी कोशिश की कि ये सिर्फ मुसलमानों का मसला नहीं है, ये पूरा का पूरा जमीन का मसला है, लैंड के, जिसको कहते हैं कि उसकी ओनरशिप का मसला है। आप लिमिटेशंस एक्ट इसमें लेके आए तो, लेकिन उसका देखिए नैरेटिव बिल्डिंग कैसे हुई। आज परसों एमईए और दोनों काफ़ी चर्चा हो रही है कि एक ऑफिसर फ्रॉम एयरफोर्स एंड फ्रॉम इंडियन आर्मी, इन लोगों ने प्रेस ब्रीफिंग की, परसों भी की, कल भी की, शायद आज भी की, और ये कहा कि पाकिस्तान की या जो सरहद पार की जो एक्टिविटीज़ थी वो दहशतगर्दी के अलावा नफरत की भी थी। Which were the Twitter handle which asked questions within 1 hour of that incident? छत्तीसगढ़ बीजेपी, उन्होंने धर्म पूछा, जाति नहीं। कर्नाटका बीजेपी, गुजरात बीजेपी, व्हाट इज इट शो? ये हमारे नॉर्मेटिव फ्रेमवर्क का हिस्सा होते जा रहा। थैंकफुल टू द इंडियन पीपल, कहीं कुछ ना कुछ अभी भी इस मिट्टी में बचा हुआ है कि लोगों ने इसको एकदम नॉर्मल तरीके से एक्सेप्ट नहीं किया, या रिएक्शन उस तरह से नहीं हुए। हालांकि रिएक्शन हो रहे हैं देश में कई जगह पर, वो रिकॉर्ड नहीं हो रहा। लिंचिंग की घटनाएं हो रही हैं, हेट क्राइम्स हो रहे हैं, और शायद सरकार को भी एहसास है कि अति सर्वत्र वर्जेत। जब आप एक्सेस करेंगे इसके ग्लोबल रिपरकशंस हैं, लेकिन ये हमारी नॉर्म। और एक चीज और मैं मानता हूं कि हम सब लोग इस रेजीम को समझने के लिए इट्स नॉट एज सिंपल एज हिंदुत्व मोदीत्व. वी नीड टू चेंज आवर वोकैबुलरी. हमारी वोकैबुलरी बड़ी लिमिटेड है और इनके पास जो वोकैबुलरी है अनलिमिटेड. इनके पास जो स्पेशल इंडेक्स है वो अनलिमिटेड है. वी नीड टू हम अभी भी उसी दायरे में सोचते हैं. लिबरल लेफ्ट फ्रेमवर्क लार्जली हमें से अधिकांश लोग जो यहां बैठे हुए हैं एक इलेक्शन की विक्ट्री पे, बाय इलेक्शन विक्ट्री पे वी स्टार्ट सेलिब्रेटिंग. उत्तर प्रदेश में नतीजे थोड़े बेहतर आए, हमें लगा कि किला फतह हो गया, जबकि हम आप नहीं जानते हैं इलेक्शन इज वोन बाय अरिथमेटिक. कहीं 2+2 2.5 हो गया, अब 5 के करीब आ गए, आप चुनाव जीत गए. बट वी हैव लॉस्ट द लार्जली आइडियोलॉजिकल बैटल. एक नया हिंदुस्तान, एक नया भारतवर्ष बनाने में वो सफल हुए हैं और हम सबका विरोध, हमारी बातें तकरीबन हमेशा हाशिए पे हो जाती हैं. एक आखिरी चीज कह करके मैं खत्म करूंगा, क्योंकि इशारा मेजॉरिटेरियनिज्म और मेजॉरिटी, मैं बार बार इस पर मैंने लिखा भी है कई दफा. मेजॉरिटी पार्लियामेंट्री डेमोक्रेसी की इनहेरेंट फीचर है. यू नीड अ वर्किंग मेजॉरिटी टू रन अ गवर्नमेंट. लेकिन मेजॉरिटेरियनिज्म is antithetical to democracy. This majoritarianism of the current regime takes the garb of parliamentary majority and follows majoritarian track. जहां will of the majority is perpetually, कोई एक चीज नहीं है कि will of the majority on Friday shall remain the will of the majority on Sunday also. It's a work in progress, 24/7. The will of the supposed majority, should I take Benedict Anderson's, that majority is imagined majority whose will is crafted in a factory setting 24/7. So I don't wish to end on a note of despair, but I tell you, I'm at this age in my life, with my experience of parliament being reduced to a notice board, although अभी तक पूरी तरह हुआ नहीं है notice board, but we'll have to go beyond electoral politics. It has to be. You can't even hope for a solution from only electoral democracy. Electoral democracies don't change psyche. Psyche has been altered. Anger and fear, both these have become integral to our persona, the collective Indian persona और भारतीय persona. और भय और गुस्सा अगर किसी समाज का आभूषण बन जाए, उस समाज के लिए चिंता भी सामूहिक होनी चाहिए. शुक्रिया. थैंक यू एवरीबॉडी.
बहुत शुक्रिया. आप सबका राजदीप पहले चले गए, मनोज जी जा रहे हैं, प्रोफेसर ज़ोया हसन, आशुतोष को एक बार फिर से मुबारकबाद. ये मौका, जैसा मैंने कहा कि आज की रात भी और आने वाली रातों में भी हम ये उम्मीद करें कि सरहद के दोनों तरफ लोग महफूज रहेंगे और जाने नहीं जाएंगी. हम इसकी कामना कर सकते हैं. आपका एक बार बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया.